Hi, Ginger Lumen here. Would like to share with you a brief and not perfect launch for our card, Pompeii and Circumstance, where students are asked to go back in time and save the citizens of Pompeii. Again, I'm going to just give you a sample launch, a way to get kids interested and hooked into this particular project. It might be different for your students, the launch. Feel free to change it up. This is just one particular sample. So, here we go. Let's go back in time. Let's go back in time before Barack Obama was president, before disco, before the 1950s drive-ins and rock and roll, before World War II. Let's go a little bit faster now in our time machines. Let's go back before the Industrial Revolution, before the British settled Australia, before the American Revolution, before the cathedrals went up in Europe. Let's go back before Columbus sailed to America, before the Black Plague, and before the fall of the Roman Empire. In fact, we're going to go back about 2,000 years to a little town called Pompeii that rests at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, 79 A.D. Pompeii has about 20,000 people in it. And they, for 24 hours, had felt some rumblings in the ground. They had felt earthquakes, but they didn't know what was going on. Till one day, at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, they heard a huge explosion, and they ran outside and looked at the mountain, at Mount Vesuvius, and there was a giant column of smoke and ash rising up out of that mountain. Now, the people of Pompeii didn't have a word for the term volcano. They didn't even know what it was. They just looked and said, "Oh, that's nothing to be worried about. That's just some smoke up there," and went back about their daily lives. In just a few minutes, 15-kilometer column of smoke continued to rise above the mountain and started spreading over the top of Pompeii. You know what it's like when water vapor rises and cools off? What happens to it? It cools off, condenses, and begins to rain, right? Same thing happens when boiling rock rises, cools, only rain doesn't fall. Hard rock falls. And with Mount Vesuvius, what fell was mostly pumice, which is a light, airy rock, but also there were chunks of the mountain that came down too. If you were out in the street, that's worse than hail. And in just a few minutes, the streets were starting to get covered with rock. 1 hour after the eruption, thousands of people realized that things were going horribly wrong, and they decided to try to flee. However, in the town of Pompeii, it's not just everyday people like us. They had a social strata, very strict, where there were the rich people, the ruling class, they had the merchants, they had the everyday working people, and they also had slaves. Interesting thing about slaves is that their job was to protect their masters and their masters' property. And if their masters chose to stay, so did the slaves. They had no choice. By mid-afternoon, 100 million tons of rock had fallen on the city already. Within 7 hours, Pompeii's streets were almost deserted, and just as if snow falls down in our town and it shuts our doors and traps us inside, too much snow, that's what was happening with this superheated rock. A town across the bay of Naples called Herculaneum had ashen rock also coming down, but they didn't have it coming from the sky because Herculaneum, the wind was blown just way. Herculaneum was spared where Pompeii was not. But where it was not spared is that it was closer to the foot of Mount Vesuvius, and pretty soon a pyroclastic surge raced down the mountain toward Herculaneum and hit it. What this pyroclastic surge is boiling ash and rock that is 5 times hotter than boiling water. And the people there experienced instant death. If you were outside, your body didn't just burn, it turned to charcoal. If you were inside, if you were one of the lucky ones to be inside, your soft tissue, your skin, your hair, just vaporized. Your teeth and your bones shattered, and your brain boiled and then exploded. They found 300 men and women in the town of Herculaneum buried underneath 25 meters of rubble. Another pyroclastic surge that had hit Herculaneum, another one was coming toward Pompeii. And luckily, it didn't hit the town, but what it did bring was poisonous gas, carbon dioxide, hydrogen oxide, and it raced into the town. The clouds of poisonous gas came into the town, and some people were choking, and some chose to commit suicide because they were afraid of the death that was probably coming. Some people curled up, they hugged one another, and in that position is where we found them 1,500 years later. Those who didn't commit suicide, with their first breath of that hot ash and poisonous gas, their lungs reacted naturally and produced a very fluid that was to protect their lungs. But with the second breath, they breathed in more ash, and that fluid mixed with that ash and created a sludgy type of concrete inside their lungs. And with the third breath of air, that concrete thickened even further, and they suffocated. When scientists came in and excavated their bodies and the casts that were left in the ash, they knew that those folks had died painfully, and they knew that they had died painfully. This is an interesting story. What I'd like for us to do now, though, is think about what was Pompeii like? And what if we were to travel back then? We knew, with what we know now about volcanoes, they had a 24-hour window of opportunity to leave. How would we get 20,000 people out of town? How would we do it while still respecting their beliefs of those different layers? Who should get out first? Should the slaves get out first? Who gets out first? We've got to make those decisions, because this sort of thing didn't have to happen. And if we travel back through time, knowing what we know now, what would our plan be? Thanks. Hope you enjoy our LifePractice PBL card, Pompeii and Circumstance, and that you really get kids hooked in the social studies, the science, the math, the reading and writing that's involved with this really interesting project. Thanks.